Hello everybody, welcome to Bible Bites. Dean Dwyer with you for Isa Street Baptist Church. Our question for today is, will democracy survive COVID? Now, that's a really good question. I think a lot of people are asking themselves this question, largely because in many Western nations, people have been really shocked at the speed at which some of our basic freedoms have been stripped. Now, at the outset, when all of this first began, people were content to sacrifice freedom for what we were told was going to be an initial 2-week quarantining period so that we could ensure the virus died out in our communities. But it has since become very clear that governments throughout the world are positioning themselves to keep a certain degree of emergency powers into the future. Now, instead of trusting its citizens to follow and abide by sensible health advice, governments have instead sought to control their citizens through authoritarian policies. Now, governments the world over might think that they've navigated this period quite well. But on the contrary, I think if you look at this from a societal level, there is a growing divide and a deep distrust between citizens and their governments now as a result of these authoritarian policies enacted over the last 18 months. And that's, of course, evidenced by the fact that there are a growing number of protests throughout the world. I think a lot of people simply assume that because democracy has been a guiding principle for some 2,500 years now, that it will continue unchallenged as the defining governmental system of Western nations into the foreseeable future. Now, that may well be the hope of a lot of people, but I don't know it will be the reality, particularly since many leaders are now very much addicted to the power that has been handed to them under the guise of the so-called health crisis. Now, to be fair, they're in good company because it was Winston Churchill himself who once praised the fascist dictator Mussolini because he believed he achieved great things for Italy. Now, I think if you talk to the families of Mussolini's victims, they would have an entirely different view. Well, unfortunately, the power of the executive branch of government, particularly in the UK and Australia, has expanded enormously. Worse, ministerial appointees in the government have been egged on by a media class who, instead of holding the powerful to account, have been focused on making sure that power was exercised to their preferred ends. And as a result, there is very little accountability in these governmental public health decisions, and we see all of these innumerable laws, rules, and regulations being broken by government, all under the pretext of a public health crisis. Now, as the COVID crisis winds down, if in fact politicians will let it wind down, we, being the citizens of our nations, must demand a stop to this newfound enthusiasm for government to rule by edict under the pen of bureaucrats and health officials. The question, though, becomes, is it too late? You see, after 9/11, the United States enacted legislation which was supposedly required to fight terrorism. The threat has long since passed, but those laws, those rules and regulations still remain. And I believe, unfortunately, the same will be true of COVID. You know, after 9/11, one religion was labelled a terror threat and all of its adherents looked upon as suspicious until proven otherwise. You see, under COVID, what's happened now under COVID-19 is that every human being is now classed as a biosecurity threat. That makes everyone, all of us, a potential threat to the state. And in the wrong hands, the state can be an all-consuming beast. In the Bible, Daniel wrote extensively about that, and he also gave us the model as to how to deal with it. Number 1, search the scriptures. Number 2, set your face toward God. And number 3, seek God. He is our refuge and strength, and whatever happens, can we rejoice in the fact that God is still firmly in control.